Tonight, Mark Carney fires back after the U.S. demands concessions ahead of trade talks.
Look, you know what's an irritant? 50% tariff on steel, 50% tariff on aluminum, 25% tariff on automobiles, all the tariffs on forest products.
The concessions he says Canada wants from the U.S. Plus, At Issue is here to break down the politics driving it. New details about the deadly Air Canada collision at LaGuardia Airport.
Stop.
What we're learning from a preliminary report about the final moments before the crash. And could Vancouver get a Major League Baseball team?
Yeah, I'd go. Why not?
I would like it if the MLB came here, yes.
The city takes a swing, but is it a field of dreams?
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Thanks for joining us. Adrian is away. The Prime Minister is pushing back tonight on the idea of offering any concessions to the U.S. to kickstart trade talks, saying there are two parties in these negotiations and Canada isn't taking instruction from the U.S. He's demanding action on the tariffs hurting Canadian steel, aluminum, auto and forestry sectors. The U.S. wants American booze back in provincial liquor stores. Both countries are staring down a July deadline for reviewing the current free trade agreement, CUSMA. But as Ashley Burke explains, 2 months out, there are clearly some very big obstacles in the way.
The Prime Minister pushing back after Donald Trump's team laid out their grievances, demanding concessions to formally start talks on North America's free trade deal.
You know what's an irritant? 50% tariff on steel, 50% tariff on aluminum, 25% tariff on automobiles, all the tariffs on forest products. Those are more than irritants. Those are violations of our trade deal.
American officials say they're at the end of their rope when it comes to some provincial boycotts on American booze.
It is outrageous that Canada will not put U.S. spirits on the shelf.
My sense is there may have to be an enforcement action to deal with this issue on wine and spirits in Canada.
Mark Carney says there's a solution.
We can make progress very quickly on that, with progress in other areas.
Ontario's premier telling American TV networks it's time for formal talks.
This all comes down to one thing, Kira. Let's get back to the table. Let's start negotiating.
Instead, the U.S. went around the government, now offering tariff relief directly to Canadian and Mexican steel and aluminum companies if they build production capacity in the U.S., similar to pressure they've put on the auto sector.
Car companies are coming from Canada, they're coming from Mexico, Germany, Japan.
It is a very kind of aggressive type strategy by the U.S.
This trade lawyer says it shows how far the U.S. is willing to go.
This really kind of reinforces the approach that we've seen from the United States for a while now, which is simply, we win if you lose.
Mr. Wiseman, do you think you can get tariff relief?
Canada's ambassador to the U.S. questioned about what Canada's doing to deal with Trump.
We think of the United States every morning when we wake up. They don't necessarily think of us. We have to remind them of the importance of the relationship.
Trump's trade representative warns the president's not going back to a world without tariffs and that any changes to sectoral levies is up to Trump.
And Ashley, what did the Prime Minister say about getting to the table with the U.S.?
Well, Erica, Mark Carney said the government is ready to go into detailed negotiations, but is also ready to wait if that has to happen. His ambassador to the U.S. faced questions from the Conservatives about if Canada is trying to slow walk this. Mark Wiseman wouldn't comment publicly about their strategy, but repeatedly said they are willing and able to start formal trade talks.
Thanks for this, Ashley Burke in Ottawa. Canada's ambassador to the U.S. is also dealing with anger here at home after he issued an English-only invitation to MPs with no French. Today, he apologized.
This was an error, an unacceptable error. That has now been corrected, and the invitation has been resent in both official languages.
He added he is committed to promoting bilingualism at home and abroad. The invitation was for an upcoming reception in Washington to mark the start of Wiseman's tenure. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board has released a report on last month's fatal crash at LaGuardia Airport involving an Air Canada jet and a fire truck. Chris Reyes now on the last-minute warning it says was misunderstood.
In this report, a clearer picture of that fatal runway collision between an Air Canada Express flight and an emergency vehicle at LaGuardia Airport. A key revelation from the National Transportation Safety Board, what the firefighter in that truck heard when they were given this urgent command just moments before the crash.
Stop, 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 truck on, stop, stop, stop.
The firefighter said he heard those words come through the tower radio, but did not know who it was for. And by the time they realized it was for them, they had already entered the runway.
I question whether or not the word stop, stop, stop was appropriate, given the fact the truck was already on the runway with an airplane. Maybe the command should have been, get off the runway, evacuate the runway.
The report also outlines in greater detail the final minute and a half before the crash, including that more than one emergency vehicle was trying to contact the control tower as that Air Canada Express jet was landing.
Unfortunately, they block each other, and that's where some confusion lies. That's where miscommunication lies.
The report also reveals there were 6 other emergency vehicles on standby near the runways responding to a different incident. None had transponders, which may have contributed to the runway collision warning system's failure to activate.
There was a lot of frequency congestion because there was a lot of traffic that night.
About the air traffic controllers on duty that night, including the one who made this chilling admission.
We were dealing with an emergency earlier and I messed up.
The report detailed only that they had almost 20 years each on the job and had been on shift for less than an hour before the crash.
That wasn't good to watch.
A full report is not expected for another 12 to 24 months. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
The U.S. has seized another tanker tied to Iran's oil trade, the latest in a series of back-and-forth attacks at sea. Donald Trump may have extended the ceasefire indefinitely, but as Katie Simpson shows us, both sides are trading threats and pouring on the pressure.
We intend to conduct the boarding of your vessel.
Dueling narratives over control of the seas. The U.S. says this is the moment it seized a ship carrying sanctioned Iranian oil, paired with new orders from the president to shoot and kill any small boats mining the Strait of Hormuz. It comes a day after Iran posted its own video. It says this is the Revolutionary Guard boarding a vessel, one of 2 ships it says it detained on Wednesday. Both countries attempting to assert dominance over the Strait of Hormuz and the flow of global energy.
We have total control of the strait.
President Donald Trump says he's in no rush to end the war and that he's not yet cut a deal with Iran because he doesn't know who's in charge since the U.S. killed so many senior officials.
They have all new leadership and they're fighting like cats and dogs for who's going to control.
Iran's president pushing back on social media, saying there is ironclad unity and obedience to the supreme leader, adding, "We will make the aggressor regret." There are growing fears the ceasefire may not hold much longer, adding to it new threats from Israel, the U.S.'s partner in this conflict. Israel is prepared to renew the war against Iran. We are waiting for the green light from the U.S., the defense minister said. Trump continues to offer mixed messages, from confidence he'll get a deal to threats of more military action. One thing he is ruling out, using a nuclear weapon.
We don't need it. Why do I need it? Why would a stupid question like that be asked? Why would I use a nuclear weapon when we've totally, in a very conventional way, decimated them? A nuclear weapon should never be allowed to be used by anybody.
The president admitted gas prices may remain elevated for some time. He argues it's worth it because he says it means Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
After a meeting between Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors in Washington, Donald Trump has announced that they have agreed to extend their ceasefire.
They've agreed to an additional 3 weeks of, no firing, ceasefire.
He went on to suggest that Israel and Lebanon could come to a permanent peace agreement within the year. But the ceasefire has been tenuous from the start. Today alone, Hezbollah militants fired rockets into Israel, and Israel killed at least 2 people in southern Lebanon, where it is occupying territory, it says, in order to prevent further Hezbollah attacks. Chris Brown shows us how that occupation, the continued fighting between Hezbollah and Israel, and now Israel's killing of a journalist are fueling doubts about talks.
Whatever durable truce might come out of the meetings between Israel and Lebanon, the killing of journalist Amal Khalil has convinced many Lebanese the ceasefire is stacked against them. As tributes poured in, dueling narratives took hold. Israel says Khalil was inside its occupied zone in Lebanon's south when an IDF strike killed 2 men in a car ahead of her. When she and photographer Zainab Faraj, who was injured, took cover in a building, Lebanese authorities say the IDF destroyed the building and attacked the rescuers. The IDF claims it was firing at Hezbollah terrorists who posed a threat and says it did not hinder rescue efforts. Many here believe Israel is unrestrained by the truce and can kill whoever it wants. Our team attended a mass funeral for Hezbollah fighters and civilians in the southern village of Kfar Sir, where the group is respected. There was also fury at Lebanon's national government. It's a disgrace, said this cleric. As the enemy was fighting, slaughtering, and killing us, our government was shaking hands with them.
Canada designated Hezbollah a terrorist organization more than 20 years ago. But for people here, it's seen as a protector against Israeli aggression and occupation, including a new one that's just beginning.
Mourner Dia Diaskafi told us Lebanon's government has taken no action. It's failed to find a way to protect people here.
Did Hezbollah make a mistake by starting this latest phase of the war?
Of course not, she replies. The Israelis were planning on hitting us first, so Hezbollah surprised them. It will be up to Lebanon's government to ensure the Hezbollah militants stick to any deal it agrees to with Israel. It may be an impossible task.
And in these talks in Washington, Lebanon doesn't just want to extend the ceasefire, it also wants the Trump administration to restrain Israel. Erica.
Well, Chris, Israel has its own goals for these talks, yes?
Yeah, for sure. Israel says it wants to work with Lebanon to dismantle Hezbollah and eventually get a long-term peace deal. But the path to get there is radically different. Its military says it will not leave that so-called buffer zone until Hezbollah is gone, and that is unacceptable to Lebanon. Erica.
Thanks for this, Chris. Chris Brown in Beirut. Prince Harry made an unannounced visit to Ukraine, where he used his speech at a Kyiv security conference to send a message to Vladimir Putin.
There is still a moment now to stop this war, to prevent further suffering for Ukrainians and Russians alike.
The Duke of Sussex also called on the U.S. to honor its treaty obligations and provide more support for Ukraine. It comes the same day Vladimir Zelensky was in Cyprus meeting with European leaders who approved a $144 billion loan to Ukraine and new sanctions against Russia. Canada's largest municipal police force says it will investigate allegations of anti-Semitism, racism, and misconduct within its ranks, raised by former homicide inspector Hank Idsinga. His claims were made public for the first time in an interview with Adrian. Thomas Dagla shows us the fallout.
Toronto police at first said they had no way of substantiating fresh allegations of discrimination and corruption. Now they say they'll try.
We are reaching out to the retired member to have him formally come forward to provide us some details so that we can investigate these serious allegations.
Those claims came from Hank Idsinga, previously the city's top homicide detective, whose new memoir, The High Road: Confessions of a Homicide Cop, details alleged misconduct he says he saw up close.
Racism, anti-Semitism, tyrannical behavior, corruption,
dysfunction in the senior ranks.
Itzinga recounted to CBC's chief correspondent Adrian Arsenault instances of alleged discrimination by senior officers.
That really was a seminal moment when I said, okay, you know what? I was pretty sure you're a Jew hater. Now I'm positive you're a Jew hater.
Itzinga's allegations are drawing headlines in Canada and Israel, including claims a senior officer separately called a colleague and a lawyer effing Jews.
What efforts have been made to identify this officer, and are they still employed here?
We are going to reach out to Hank. I can't tell you who it involves or any of that because I don't know.
What's more, Itzinga suggests anti-Semitism influenced how Toronto police responded to protests against Israel's war in Gaza following the October 7th Hamas attacks.
We have been increasingly relying on police to protect our institutions in our neighborhoods, and we need to know that we can continue to trust the police.
And the system is...
This lawyer says police can't be the ones investigating discrimination within their own ranks.
It's institutional, it's systemic, it's systematic, and it's embedded.
Toronto police say Itzinga had a duty to report his concerns when he was still on the force, instead of waiting years only to make the claims in public. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
A Montreal recycling plant caught fire this morning, raising concerns about air quality. A thick plume of smoke from burning tires and plastics draped the city in acrid fumes. The province deployed a mobile lab and later declared there was no risk. This very morning, the city said it was revoking the plant's license over repeated pollution violations and called the timing a coincidence. There's growing backlash in Nova Scotia tonight as the province reopens the door to fracking. Premier Tim Houston lifted a long-standing ban on the practice last year as part of a push to boost the economy. Kayla Hounsell now with what comes next.
They were invited to learn more about Nova Scotia's controversial plan to allow onshore natural gas exploration. But many have already made up their minds.
There are health risks, there are financial risks, there are risks to the water, and it's insanity.
Not all of the government's public information sessions were quiet. In 2014, the Nova Scotia government of the day responded to intense public concern and ordered an independent review of fracking, which led to a moratorium. Last year, the Progressive Conservative government, a supermajority, passed legislation to repeal that ban. Fracking involves pumping large volumes of water mixed with sand and chemicals into wells at high pressure to create cracks, allowing trapped hydrocarbons to flow to the surface. Premier Tim Houston, who's also the province's energy minister, insists resource development is necessary to combat a record deficit and gain independence from the U.S.
We're completely dependent on the United States for our natural gas at the moment, but some of that is actually originating in Alberta or out west. We have it here underfoot.
There is no fracking in the other Atlantic provinces, but Houston points to what he says is the success of fracking in Western Canada. This woman's organization has been advocating for a nationwide fracking ban.
In reality, the lived experience in BC is that there's health issues surrounding fracking sites, especially in Indigenous communities and among pregnant women.
Nova Scotia has contracted Dalhousie University to study the matter, a $30 million program. But if nothing changes, exploratory drilling could begin here as early as July. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
There's new guidance in Canada urging doctors to start testing for a condition that can cause early heart disease.
This is a very important one to prevent one of the most common causes of death amongst Canadians.
Why getting checked might take some persuasion. Vancouver is taking a shot at a Major League Baseball team.
I would like it if the MLB came here, yes.
But is the bid realistic? And
Canadian cowboy Jake Gardner.
A replacement turned champion.
Straight up and down milkshake.
We're back in 2. WestJet has announced it's raising the price many passengers will pay to check their bags. It will now cost $10 more for both the first and second checked bag, $5 if baggage is paid for in advance. The airline cites industry trends and, quote, impacts from current global conditions. It follows a similar move this week from Air Canada. Researchers say a major cause of heart attacks is being overlooked. Lipoprotein A isn't picked up by some routine cholesterol tests, but it could explain why many seemingly healthy people have early heart disease. Christine Birak looks at the risks and what you can do to protect yourself.
We did this angiogram.
Well, stress test.
Rami Medias asked his doctor to test him for lipoprotein A, or LPA. It may be the most important cholesterol test people have never heard of.
And my brother got tested first.
Unlike LDL, or bad cholesterol, LPA cannot be lowered with diet or exercise. Even young, active people can have high LPA. It's genetic and a major cause of unexpected strokes and heart attacks in otherwise healthy people.
No idea that it existed and how you treat it.
It should be measured once in a person's lifetime.
That is the recommendation. Now a new paper gives doctors a framework for screening, risk assessment, and management of elevated LPA, which affects an estimated 20% of Canadians.
This is a very important one to prevent one of the most common causes of death amongst Canadians.
If cholesterol is like traffic on a highway, LPA behaves like Velcro. It sticks to the road. Not only does it build plaque faster, but it makes clots harder to clear. But many family doctors say they don't routinely test for LPA.
There will always be things that you can control, and there will be some things that will be outside your control.
Historically, we haven't really done a great job following lipoprotein A levels because there wasn't much we could do about it.
LPA is fixed, but knowing your level can help mitigate risk by guiding lifestyle changes and powerful LDL lowering treatments.
And in the very near future, we're going to see new medications that may be able to safely and effectively lower lipoprotein A level.
Maybe we should be offering lipoprotein A testing to more people than we are.
Medias hopes his kids won't need to push for a test. Doctors say knowing about this hidden risk can save lives. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Some in Vancouver are questioning the city's motive in approving the pursuit of a Major League Baseball team.
The mayor is being quite cagey about who may have expressed interest.
So, is this just a political ploy? After the break, Rosie's here with At Issue.
Hey, Erica. Tonight, we're going to talk about the state of negotiations between Canada and the United States.
We need to work together, and we will work together in the context of what's in the best interest of both countries.
So where do things stand in those trade negotiations? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
Right back, and it is caught, no?
A confusing comebacker in Wednesday's Major League Baseball game in Seattle. A sizzling line drive stopped by the shirt of Mariners pitcher Logan Gilbert. The ball inside Gilbert's jersey was deemed out of play, and the batter safe at first. Gilbert ended up with a bruise on his stomach and cut on his hand. Vancouver is on the hunt for investors with deep pockets to back a bid for a potential MLB expansion team. The mayor says he's certain there is private sector interest, but as Caroline Bargout shows, the idea might still be a long shot.
Vancouver is already home to the Canucks, the Golden Eyes, the Canadians, who are the farm team for the Toronto Blue Jays, the Whitecaps, and the BC Lions. Now Vancouver City Council wants to explore a bid for a Major League Baseball team too.
The motion passed with Councillor Orr in opposition.
And maybe it's a consortium of
this sports expert says bringing and keeping an MLB team in the city won't be easy.
There are 81 regular season home games, and that's a big season. That's larger than any other team in our city or region has, and so it's a lot of dates to fill a stadium.
The MLB is thinking about expanding the league to include 2 more teams, and Vancouver wants to be considered. But it will need to find private investors willing to spend billions to finance a team and build a stadium to house it. The city is already struggling to find land for a stadium for the Whitecaps, the #1 team in Major League Soccer that may leave Vancouver if it doesn't get one soon. The mayor insists potential investors are out there.
People expressed an interest, they approach us, and so that's why we're pushing this motion.
I don't think this is a likely proposition.
This political science lecturer says this all seems more like an election ploy for a mayor hoping to win another term this fall.
So far, the mayor is being quite cagey about who may have expressed interest. And so without an answer to that question, it's impossible to know whether this is just empty talk or a real substantive proposal.
Either way, Vancouver sports fans seem to like the idea.
Yeah, I'd go. Why not?
I would like it if the MLB came here, yes.
I haven't been to baseball games in a long time, but if the opportunity comes up, I would go.
The city has 60 days to find a potential owner committed to pursuing an expansion franchise. Then MLB would decide if Vancouver is ready for another big league team. Caroline Bargood, CBC News, Vancouver.
Time now for the breakdown. And tonight, Rosie's here with At Issue.
At issue tonight, Canada-U.S. trade, more tensions with U.S. officials now calling for trade concessions from Canada.
We have a variety of issues that we think are not consistent with USMCA right now, and we'd like the Canadians to comply with those things right now.
But the Prime Minister is pushing back.
We're not sitting here taking notes, okay, and taking instruction from the United States. Look, you know what's an irritant? 50% tariff on steel, 50% tariff on aluminum.
So what's to be made of the state of these tensions between Canada and the U.S. on trade, and how will a new Canada Council on the United States and a new ambassador help Canada's response? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. I mean, we haven't talked about this in a while, to be fair, so we were due, and it seemed like there were a bunch of pieces moving around this week. And none of them seemed particularly encouraging watching them from the outside, although when you talk to people behind closed doors, they don't seem to think things are as dire. But this notion that there is some sort of entry fee, that the Prime Minister says he hasn't heard that term, but certainly a concession that is required to get Canada to the actual table. What do we make of that, Chantal?
Not very much. There was one point where it was said that we should make a concession to get Donald Trump's attention because he's preoccupied with something else. Seriously, trade negotiation does not involve the president being at the table to do any of this. No, it doesn't bode particularly well. But I agree with the take that the government has offered concessions back in July to try to get things moving, and nothing moved. So the notion that you would go to a negotiating table and play all your cards before you show up at the table sounds like a weird take on poker night.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not good at poker, but I don't think that's what I would do either. One of the things that got the Prime Minister a bit riled up there at the end was he was asked again about U.S. liquor, which continues to be banned in a number of provinces in the country, including Ontario, Manitoba, and Quebec. And that doesn't seem to be something anyone's willing to back down on. I don't know if that's real, Andrew. Like, is that really the thing that's going to move things along?
Well, they're certainly going to use it, hold it in reserve as a bargaining chip. It's clearly got the Americans' attention. It causes them a great deal of loss of revenue. The Prime Minister has also got the advantage of being able to say, well, look, it's not me, it's the provinces. I can't really force them to do anything. So it's that's rhetorical. But look, yeah, the entry fee nonsense is ridiculous, depending on exactly what was said to whom. We only have the basis of this from somebody leaking it to us. Yeah. But I think it's somewhat encouraging that we're talking about specific irritants like supply management, like the Online Streaming Act, and not a generalized, we don't want to have a trade agreement with you anymore, we think this is all bad for America. That at least is some kind of coming down to brass tacks. We're still in the position where the Americans think at the end of this that we'll still have tariffs on Canadian exports. And moving them off of that is going to be very difficult. But this is a little bit more like standard operating procedure, negotiating positions put out in public, rather than sort of existential questions, at least this week.
Is that kind of the part of the issue, though, Althea, is that some of this is being said in public, but presumably, you know, we don't know what the negotiations are like or what the talks are like, and certainly the Prime Minister is not going to negotiate in public.
I think the truth is we don't actually know that there are actual negotiations happening at the moment.
Right.
We know that there is engagement. I mean, we can see it with our own eyes. Jana Charette, the person who's our lead trade negotiator, has said that they're engaging. But the ambassador testified at committee today, Thursday, and basically said Canada was ready to commence negotiations. When you ask the minister who's in charge of those negotiations, Dominic LeBlanc, to list the negotiations that have happened since the fall, they don't provide you with any. And, you know, you had Kyle Seaback, the Ontario Conservative MP at the House of Commons, trying to get the ambassador to reveal the nature of the number of negotiations, and he would not. So we don't actually know what is happening, never mind, you know, happening behind closed doors and what's being traded or not. It is very clear that the Americans are interested in putting the pressure on Canada to come to the table, possibly with those irritants that they have been talking about, and that we are reluctant for the reasons that Chantal outlined, that we have been burned before and we feel we will be burnt again. Also, I found Jana Charette spoke to the Business Summit earlier this week, and she basically said that her marching instructions are to basically preserve the status quo. So she does not want to view this, and the government does not want to view this as a renegotiation. And so there is a sense that they're dragging the puck. The Conservatives have latched onto that. Now they're finding space for themselves in this conversation, which is, it is very costly, and people are going to lose their job when the Americans, not just in terms of the rhetoric that you heard, you know, like the deputy U.S. trade rep talk about how Mark Carney is making this personal and he's guilty of malpractice, but when you have people who are losing their jobs because the tariffs are changing and they're becoming more punitive, there is a cost to dragging the puck. And so I think the government is kind of in this hard position where the politics are to keep the strategy that they're engaged with. There's no doubt about that. It is better to be Captain Canada. But on the policy front, are there more wins to drag it out, or will the cost be so high that maybe it's not worth the cost? We don't know the answer to those questions yet.
Except that choice is a non-choice. That was the choice a year ago. We're going to settle tariffs. Excuse me, but I have not seen anything in the window that takes you away from the pain that Althea rightly describes. So this seems based on the assumption that there's the deal to be had that would work for everyone versus just dragging the puck because we can get a better deal. I don't think those are really the two choices. I think at this point we are in the middle of a conversation, not a negotiation, that is basically the U.S. wants to win and wants Canada to lose. That is not a negotiation. It's the opposite of what you want. But at the same time, I looked at this council that got put together this week, which includes Conservatives, union leaders, people who agreed to serve on this Canada-U.S. Council, which I have always believed was a strategy to buy cover for the federal government in the previous tenure of Justin Trudeau, and now as in, not only do we speak with one voice, but we also speak with one voice on the strategy. And I haven't heard any of the people who joined, Aaron O'Toole, Lisa Raitt, others, and they did so with their eyes wide open, say, we are joining because we think it's time to not drag the puck because there's a deal in the making.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Edgar.
I think there's a lot to be said for running down the clock. For two reasons. One is every day that goes by, Trump is getting weaker politically. He's now down in the mid-30s in approval ratings. He's got a lot less room to maneuver politically, a lot fewer people he can just thumb his nose at in terms of his own constituencies. We have divisions in this country, but we're a lot more united on this question than the Americans are, for the same reason Ukraine is a lot more united than Russia. You know, we're defending our own turf here under attack. So I think there's some, and the other reason is we really have to wait and see what kind of talks the Americans want to have. As we've been discussing, to this point, it's all been you make concessions, we make none. We, at the end of the day, we want tariffs to still continue. And of course, we have no idea whether, at the end of the day, they would have any interest in actually living up to their end of the bargain, actually sticking by the things that they agree to. The later in the day, the later in Trump's term that this actually is negotiated, the better for us. So I don't see any reason to rush into a deal.
30 seconds, Althea.
Well, I don't know that there's a deal to be had at the moment, but I think that the cost of not having a conversation is something that is something to watch, I guess is what I would say, because I think it's the first political point of demarcation between these two political parties. I agree with everything my colleagues have said. I do think the government strategy is to buy time. I think we know what the strategy is. I think there's the debate about whether or not going forward that is the best one.
Okay, got to leave this here. I know we'll talk about it again when we come back. We will look at Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre taking their political messaging online.
The only talks that Mark Carney is doing are YouTube videos.
So that's not a new thing going online, but what's to be made of the battle between Carney and Poilievre over social media? That's next. At issue, dueling videos. The Prime Minister and Pierre Poilievre are using online videos to speak directly to Canadians, but the move has drawn criticism from both sides.
I think the Prime Minister should get away from all of the theatrics, the YouTube videos, and the distractions.
More than that, Pierre Poilievre saying you need to explain your plan to Canadians on trade talks. Says you're showboating too much. You need to stop the YouTube videos.
Yeah, when's he ever negotiated anything?
So is this the new preference for speaking to Canadians? Why is the PM in particular reaching out this way? Let's bring everyone back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. It's not new that anybody's talking in social media, that they're doing their own videos. I think the framing of the way the Prime Minister put his forward, that this was sort of a future guidance, I think was the language he used for Canadians. Guidance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also thought Pierre Poilievre criticizing it was kind of a little ironic, but Andrew, please give me your take.
Well, forward guidance is an odd thing to invoke because it was a bit of a bust as a policy and central banks moved off of it. But nevertheless, he's trying to shape the debate, frame the issues surrounding it, prepare people perhaps for bad news. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of the usual boasting about his record, such as it is, and making promises for the future. I was struck by the historical and military allusions, which seem to suggest that more than just trade talks are at stake here, and we'll have to find out just where we're going with the relationship with Donald Trump and the Americans. But it was quite somber in its tone. I should say, I think we should be pleased that our leaders are speaking to us in more than 30-second sound bites. 10 minutes, you've got to kind of sustain an argument. I thought Pierre Poilievre's rebuttal to it was quite good. He pointed out that, there's been no new pipelines built. There's been no new trade agreements negotiated. There's been very little progress on housing. They're spending more. The deficits are up. These are substantive complaints. They're rebuttable on the Prime Minister's side, but we're having contests of arguments and facts rather than just people yelling at each other and calling each other names, and I think we should be pleased about that.
Althea, are you pleased about that?
I'd love to see our political leaders talk to us in complete sentences, so I'm not going to criticize that.
I agree.
There was a trade agreement signed, approved. It was Indonesia, but it was started under Justin Trudeau.
That's right. That's why I said negotiated.
Yes. So it's pretty clear, and I believe the Prime Minister's office, or at least the advisors around him, have acknowledged that the Prime Minister has, for many months, been thinking about opening this new line of communication to Canadians in the style of FDR and the fireside chats that Americans heard on the radio. I think from that you can gather that the Prime Minister may be preparing the landscape to deliver bad news. Whether or not Mark Carney sees himself as a wartime leader, I do not know. But I do know that a lot of voters did vote for Mark Carney last spring because they really did feel that the United States posed a dangerous threat to Canada, not just economically, but in some cases in terms of our physical security, our territorial integrity. And so he was playing to those strengths. And it's almost better that you open a channel of communication when you have no reason to, because it sets forward an expectation that the Prime Minister will be communicating directly to Canadians in the weeks and months ahead. Now, FDR did about 28 to 30, depending on how you count, of these. And the point of making them noteworthy and newsworthy is that they don't happen too often. So I don't expect the Prime Minister to have a weekly radio address on YouTube to Canadians. But I think it is interesting what he felt he needed to say. And I think more interesting will be what the next one is about.
Yeah, Chantal?
I don't disagree with the initiative. I will hold the Prime Minister up to his promise to talk to Canadians about what hasn't worked. So not the great things that he feels that this government had done. I did not believe I would see a day when a government going into a negotiation with the United States, of all places, would have the Prime Minister show a toy soldier of someone who actually went to war with the United States. I'm sure Stephen Harpy was happy. Stephen Harpy was happy for having spent so much time educating Canadians about the War of 12. But I am still reminded, let me be old-fashioned, of Pierre Trudeau giving a weekly news conference, which actually would serve the same purpose, but would probably bring out more information in the sense that people would actually ask questions and maybe get some answers than a YouTube 10-minute lecture. So I guess the test of it is going to be over time.
Yeah, it'd be nice if...
He did do a press conference today. He did an announcement and took questions today.
It'd be nice if he showed up the question period a little more often.
Yeah, go ahead, Chantal. Yeah.
QP, but also a sit-down news conference is not the same as taking questions after a housing announcement.
Yes, I agree. But he did take some questions. And Andrew, yes, you would like to see him in question period more, as would Pierre Poilievre, as he made the point today.
Yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, they're speaking in complete sentences. On the other hand, it's careful message control, but, so were the fireside chats.
Yeah.
So what you need is the full spectrum. There's nothing wrong with them wanting to get their own message out in their own way, as long as they're also making themselves available for situations where they're not able to control the dialogue and where they're going to have questions thrown at them, whether by reporters or by MPs, that they're not necessarily fully framed and ready to answer. They have to think on their feet.
Yeah, Althea?
I agree with all of that. I mean, I agree that news conferences are important. I think, one of Justin Trudeau's shining moments, if you will, was during COVID and the news conferences outside of his residence that kind of gave people comfort. And I think that is something else that Prime Minister Carney is going after. But I do think, we do need to recognize that media reach, traditional media reach, is not what it used to be. We are banned from Meta platform, Instagram and Facebook. And so while I do absolutely believe in the role of journalists and in democracy, and I find it shameful the Prime Minister is not going to question period as often as he should be, in my opinion, I do also see a value in them wanting to communicate through their own channels, because they will reach a lot of people in who may not be reading us.
Last quick word, Chantal.
And it does put the onus on him to show up again, and to show up saying something more than what he said the time before. So, because otherwise it's going to be a useless exercise. So he has put some obligation on himself by doing it.
Well, lots of people watch and listen to you, just so you guys know that. In case you forgot, that is at issue on The National. We're going to keep this conversation going. We'll talk about that battle over parliamentary committees, why it matters. Now back to Erica in Vancouver.
Thanks, Rosie. Coming up, a Canadian makes history at the Houston Rodeo.
To be the only Canadian bull rider to ever do so, it's a very cool accomplishment for me.
How he became the #1 rider in the world. Next, in our moment. This is Canadian bull rider Jacob Gardner moments after he competed at the Houston Rodeo, one of the biggest rodeos in the world. Gardner is the first Canadian to win the competition, which made him the #1 ranked bull rider in the world. Now, his ride to the top makes our moment.
Canadian cowboy Jake Gardner.
Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. They have a rodeo called Houston. I got to go to compete and ended up claiming the Houston Livestock Rodeo Bull Riding Championship. It's, I would say, the biggest rodeo in the world. You got to stay on for 8 seconds, and they have a score out of 100, and they have 50 points on the rider's ability and 50 points on the bucking bull's ability. The bull I rode in that final round, his name was Milkshake. Milkshake! He bucks really hard. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, and I rode, and the place erupted, and it was wild. I was the only one to ride for the full 8 seconds. Everyone else bucked off in that final.
He'll set the bar. Oh, Canada!
It's like a dream come true. I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about it right now, and to be the only Canadian bull rider to ever do so. It's a very cool accomplishment for me. It was a surreal feeling to kind of be in that moment, that's for sure.
And Jacob wasn't even supposed to compete at this rodeo. The top 40 riders qualified. He was in 56th place, but at the last moment, he got a call to come in as a replacement, and clearly he was ready. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. I'm Erica Johnson in Vancouver. Take care.